Hola! Oh,
What is that? Stay behind me.
The makeup artist's hands were trembling so badly that the brush handle rattled against the vanity table. She wasn't shaking from cold. She was shaking from terror. Every time she applied a layer of heavy, industrial-strength foundation to Maria Jonathan's cheekbone, a new bruise seemed to bloom beneath the skin. It was purple and angry, and it rejected the concealment. The artist pulled the brush back and stared at the fresh blood seeping through a hairline fracture on Maria's jaw. "Ma'am," the woman whispered. Her French accent was thick with panic. "You do not need a podium. You need a trauma surgeon. You need a hospital, not a summit stage." Maria Jonathan stared into the lighted vanity mirror. The reflection looking back at her was a ruin. A split lip that had been glued shut with medical adhesive. A jaw swollen to twice its size but contoured with shadow to look normal. A finger on her left hand splinted with tape and hidden inside a velvet glove. Maria met the artist's eyes in the mirror and replied in the same flawless, steely French. "I need justice. The makeup just needs to last 90 minutes. 90 minutes. That was the timeline. That was the lifespan she had left. Because in 90 minutes, Maria would either expose the 7 most powerful people in the room who had orchestrated a global trafficking network under the guise of diplomacy, or the internal bleeding and the men waiting in the wings would finish what their mercenaries started 3 nights ago. That was when she learned that screaming within soundproof walls changes nothing. But evidence changes everything. Now listen closely. There is a rumor circulating in the intelligence community that this conspiracy touched dozens of nations. One of them might be yours. So while the world watches these diplomats shake hands, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button, because the story you are about to hear reveals how corruption hides in plain sight. It wears diplomatic badges and smiles for the cameras. The air in the preparation room was stale. It was recycled and smelled faintly of hairspray and antiseptic. It was 45 minutes before the opening of the International Anti-Trafficking Summit. Maria stood up. The movement sent a jagged bolt of lightning through her ribcage. She stifled a gasp and gripped the edge of the vanity table. Breathe. Shallow breaths. Do not expand the lungs too far. Her mind was fractured by pain and exhaustion, and it betrayed her. For a split second, the sterile white room dissolved. The smell of hairspray was replaced by the acrid stench of burning flesh. Her own. It was a flash of memory she could not control. Darkness. A single bulb. A voice that was calm and professional. A voice that carried a polite Canadian accent she had heard in staff meetings for 3 years. "I know you have the files, Maria. Give us the code." The crack of bone. The scream she could not hold back. Maria blinked hard, forcing the memory back into the vault. She looked at her wrist. Beneath the velvet glove and the long sleeve of her blazer, her skin was a map of burns and lacerations. But deeper than the injuries was the knowledge she carried. 3 years. 8,000 hours of recorded conversations. 7 names. She touched the small pendant around her neck. It was heavy. Not with gold, but with data. But the data was useless if she died before entering the dead man's switch code. She had set it up as a failsafe. If she did not input a specific alphanumeric sequence into her secure server every 2 hours, the entire encrypted archive would blast out to 11 major news agencies worldwide. The problem was that her last entry was during the torture, moments before they smashed her phone. She had managed to access a burner device in the bathroom 10 minutes ago, a phone she had hidden in the venue weeks earlier as a contingency. She had exactly 53 minutes remaining before the system triggered. If it triggered prematurely without her narration to guide the release, the corrupt officials would spin it. They would call it deep fake audio. They would call her a disgruntled and mentally unstable employee. She had to survive the speech. She had to present the context live. "I am ready," Maria said. Her voice was raspy but steady. She adjusted her blazer, ensuring it hid the bandages binding her torso. She practiced the opening line in her head. English, French, Korean. Each syllable was a victory over pain. She walked out of the dressing room and into the backstage corridor of the Geneva International Conference Center. The scale of the hypocrisy was breathtaking. The venue was a cavernous hall of glass and steel overlooking the serene Lake Geneva. Flags from 45 countries hung from the rafters. The floor was a sea of expensive suits and clinking champagne flutes and polite laughter. This was the International Anti-Trafficking Summit, the world's premier event for combating modern slavery. The media framing was perfect. CNN and BBC were already broadcasting live to 34 nations. The Chirons read, "The world gathers to fight modern slavery." Maria stood in the shadows of the wings watching them. There was director Chen Wei, her boss, a Canadian citizen of Chinese descent, aged 58, with silver hair and a grandfatherly smile. He was the summit organizer, a respected advocate who had graced the cover of Time magazine. He was currently shaking hands with the Swiss delegation, looking every bit the savior. To his left was Pavel Sokolov, the Russian deputy minister. 52 and built like a tank with eyes that looked like frozen vodka. He was laughing at a joke while his hand rested on the shoulder of a young aide. Further down was Catherine Moreau, the French Interpol liaison, elegant and 45, holding a glass of wine with the grace of a Parisian socialite. And James Adeyemi, the chief commissioner from Nigeria, big and boisterous and commanding the room with his presence. They looked like leaders. They looked like heroes. Maria knew the truth. She knew that Pavel's shipping containers did not carry grain. They carried people. She knew Catherine Moreau tipped off traffickers 20 minutes before every Interpol raid. She knew James Adeyemi owned the warehouses where passports were burned. And she knew that Chen Wei, the man smiling for the cameras, took a 10% cut of every human transaction in the Eastern Hemisphere. Maria was just the translator assigned to the executive office. The furniture. For 3 years, she had been invisible. They spoke in front of her because she was just a notepad with legs, a language specialist who processed their documents and attended their meetings but held no power. They did not know she spoke 5 languages. They did not know the necklace she wore was a high-fidelity recorder. She took a step forward. The pain in her side was a dull roar now. Across the room in the section reserved for the South Korean delegation, a man was sitting perfectly still. He did not fit. While the other delegates were mingling and networking and posturing, Dae-seong-han sat with the stillness of a predator waiting for movement. He was listed as a junior attaché to the trade delegation, but even from a distance, the air around him warped with danger. He wore a suit that cost more than Maria's annual salary, but it struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. When he adjusted his cuff, tattoos peeked out. Dark and intricate ink that disappeared up his neck and sleeve. His hands were scarred. His knuckles were rough. The whispers about him had been circulating for 2 days. "That is the heir to the Baek Ho syndicate," a journalist had murmured in the press pit. "They say he controls the Busan shipping routes, suspected of 23 murders. Untouchable because his family bankrolls half the political campaigns in Seoul. Dae-seong-han, the mafia boss." But Dae-seong was not thinking about shipping routes. His dark eyes were scanning the room with a precision that had nothing to do with organized crime and everything to do with survival. North exit, 2 guards, standard pistols. South exit, blocked by the press pool, ventilation shafts. Too small. He was bored. He swirled the water in his glass. This entire summit was a farce. He hated politicians. He hated the way they smiled while lying. He was actually 15 years deep into a cover operation for the NIS. He had built a case connecting organized crime to diplomatic immunity, but he had to play the part of the gangster to survive. And then he saw her. His gaze locked onto the woman in the wings. The secretary. To anyone else, she looked nervous. To Dae-seong, who had spent 15 years living in the spaces between life and death, she looked like a walking casualty. He narrowed his eyes. She is favoring her left side. Broken ribs, at least 3. He watched her adjust her sleeve. She winced. Why? The fabric barely touched her. He looked closer, his vision honed by years of threat assessment. Her jawline is wrong. The makeup is too heavy on the right side. And she is trembling. Not nerves. Adrenaline crash. Dae-seong sat up straighter. I know those injuries, he thought. A chill ran down his spine. That is the signature of the cleaners. They break the ribs to make breathing painful, then they go for the fingers. The cleaners were high-end mercenaries. They did not rob people. They extracted information. And they only worked for clients with diplomatic immunity. Someone ordered a hit on a summit translator, Dae-seong realized. The thought clicked into place like a bullet in a chamber. Why torture a secretary? Unless she is not just a secretary. The lights in the hall dimmed. A spotlight hit the main podium. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome the senior translator of the IATS, Ms. Maria Jonathan, for the opening statement. Polite applause. Maria stepped into the light. To Maria, the walk to the microphone felt like crossing a minefield. 10 meters. 5 meters. Her vision blurred at the edges. The heat of the spotlight felt like physical weight pressing down on her broken body. One step. Another step. Do not fall. Not yet. She reached the podium. She gripped the sides of it. Her knuckles turned white inside the velvet gloves. She could see Chen Wei in the front row clapping politely. His eyes were cold and dead. He was daring her. He thought she was broken. He thought she was terrified into silence. She leaned into the microphone. Distinguished delegates, she began in English. Her voice was strong. It projected to the back of the hall. We gather here to speak of truth. She switched to French. We gather to shine a light in the darkness. Then she switched to Korean, looking directly at the South Korean delegation. This summit is... I Jongsang Hwainin. Pain exploded in her chest. A rib shifted. It punctured something vital. The breath left her body in a wheezing gasp. The room tilted. The faces of the delegates smeared into a watercolor of confusion. She looked down at her sleeve. A dark stain was blossoming through the white fabric of her blazer. The stitches on her arm had burst. Not yet, she screamed internally. Just 90 more minutes. Just. Her knees gave way. Maria Jonathan collapsed. The microphone clattered against the wood. It was a deafening boom that echoed through the silence. 200 delegates gasped. Cameras flashed, capturing the fall in high definition. And in that split second between standing and falling, and between consciousness and the void, Maria felt something unexpected. She did not hit the marble floor. She felt massive hands, hard and callous and impossibly fast. They snatched her from the air. She felt the rough texture of a suit jacket and the heat of a body that moved with the speed of a striking cobra. She looked up through fading vision at a neck covered in ink and eyes that burned with intensity. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was a voice. It was not the polite concern of a diplomat. It was a low and guttural command spoken in Korean with the precise clipped diction of military intelligence. I have got you. Stay with me. And Maria's final thought before the world went black was a single confused question. Why does the mafia boss sound like the good guy? Dae-seong did not think. He reacted. The moment the translator's eyes rolled back, he was already moving. He vaulted over the low partitions separating the delegations and cleared the aisle in 2 strides. It was a movement that defied the physics of a man in a 3-piece suit. He caught her inches from the ground. His left arm scooped her legs, and his right arm supported her back. She was light, terrifyingly light. As he pulled her close, the smell hit him. It was not the expensive perfume of a diplomat. It was the metallic tang of fresh blood and the chemical scent of antiseptic masking it. "Medical!" he roared. His voice cut through the stunned silence of the hall like a whip. "Get a medic now!" He looked down at the woman in his arms, her head lulled back against his shoulder. Her blazer had fallen open slightly, revealing the blood soaking through her blouse. His eyes scanned her injuries with the cold detachment of an operative. He adjusted his grip and felt the telltale grinding of bone beneath the fabric of her side. Broken ribs. Definitely. At least 3 days old, judging by the inflammation. He looked at her hands. Even through the velvet gloves, he could feel the unnatural stiffness of the splinted finger. He saw the defensive bruising on her palms where she had tried to shield her face. This was not a mugging. This was not domestic violence. Daesung's eyes narrowed as the pieces clicked together. Burn patterns on the wrists. Precise fractures on the non-dominant hand. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He knew this signature. He had seen it on bodies pulled from the Han River, and on informants silenced in Macau. The cleaners. They were high-end mercenaries who did not rob people. They extracted information. And they only worked for clients with diplomatic immunity because they were too expensive for street gangs and too messy for corporate espionage. She is not collateral damage, Daesung realized as the chaos of the summit erupted around him. She is a target. "Sir, step away." A security guard grabbed Daesung's shoulder. Daesung did not even look at him. He shifted his shoulder with a subtle, violent shrug that sent the guard stumbling backward. "She is dying!" Daesung snarled in English. "I am taking her to the infirmary. Get out of my way." He did not wait for permission. He surged forward, carrying Maria through the throng of confused diplomats. Cameras flashed in his face, blinding him, but he did not blink. He kicked open the double doors to the backstage corridor, leaving the shouting delegates behind. As he strode down the hallway, Maria's arm slipped from her chest. Her sleeve rode up past the velvet glove. Daesung glanced down and froze mid-step. There on the inside of her wrist, right over the radial artery, was a tattoo. It was small and faint. It was almost invisible under the makeup she had tried to cover it with. It was a bird. A nightingale with a broken wing. Daesung stared at the mark. The noise of the summit faded into a dull buzz. Holy hell. He knew that symbol. He had seen it once before 18 months ago in a rainy alleyway in Prague. A terrified hotel worker had slipped a USB drive into his pocket during a police raid. That drive had contained the GPS coordinates of a trafficking route through the Czech Republic. It had saved 47 children. He had been searching for that informant for 1.5 years. He had scoured databases and facial recognition software. He had a code name for her. Source Nightingale. She is the Prague informant, Daesung realized. The shock hit him like a physical blow. She has been right here, in the belly of the beast, working for Chen Wei. He looked at her unconscious face with a new reverence. She wasn't just a victim. She was a ghost who had been haunting the same monsters he was hunting. "I have you," he whispered. "And this time I am not letting you go." Maria woke with a gasp. The world rushed back in a sensory overload of bright lights and beeping monitors. She tried to sit up, but a hand gently pushed her shoulder down. "Easy. You tore your stitches." She blinked and focused. She was in a small, sterile room. It was the summit's emergency medical facility. Standing at the door and blocking it with his massive frame was the Korean delegate. The Mafia boss. Panic surged through her. She patted her chest frantically, ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs. My phone. Where is my phone? Daeseong held it up. The screen was cracked, but it was on. Here. What time is it? She rasped. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass. 2:17 p.m., Daeseong said. His voice was measured and calm. You were out for 4 minutes. You have approximately 53 minutes before something critical happens. Want to tell me what? Maria froze. She stared at him. The man who was supposed to be a gangster was looking at her with the eyes of a tactician. How do you... Daeseong rolled up his left sleeve. He did not show her a mafia tattoo. He turned his wrist over. There, hidden beneath the band of his expensive Swiss watch, was a tiny scarred marking. It was identical to hers. A bird. A nightingale. The mark of the NIS informant network. Given only to handlers and their most trusted sources. Maria stopped breathing. The room spun. 18 months ago, Daeseong said softly. A hotel worker in Prague passed a USB drive to a man she thought was a Korean gangster. She did not know he was actually National Intelligence Service deep cover. That drive saved 47 kids. He stepped closer to the bed. I have been looking for you, Nightingale. I just did not expect to find you bleeding out on a stage in Geneva. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. They were not from sadness. They were from the overwhelming relief of finally, after 3 years, not being alone. We have a problem, Maria whispered. She clutched his arm with her good hand. The dead man's switch. 11 journalists worldwide have encrypted files. If I do not enter a code every 12 hours, everything publishes. My last code was during the torture. I have less than 2 hours. Daeseong's eyes narrowed. He processed the information instantly. If it publishes uncontrolled, Chen Wei will spin it. He will claim it is AI-generated fake news. He owns half the media outlets in Asia. We need a structured release. But first, we need to keep you alive long enough to enter that code. The handle of the door jiggled. Then it turned. Daeseong spun around. He placed himself between the door and Maria. The door swung open. 3 people walked in. Pavel Sokolov, Catherine Moreau, James Adeyemi. The air in the small room instantly turned poisonous. Such a terrible accident, Pavel said. His voice oozed false sympathy. He closed the door behind him and locked it. Young woman, so much stress. She must be exhausted. I have medical training, Catherine Moreau said. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves. Her eyes were cold, dead things. Let me assist. James Adeyemi moved to the side. He positioned himself in front of the only exit. Daeseong stood his ground. He did not look like a diplomat anymore. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart and his center of gravity low. She does not need assistance, Daeseong said. She needs rest. Get out. The medical staff in the corner looked up, but Pavel waved a hand dismissing them. Diplomatic privacy concerns, Pavel stated. Leave us. The doctors hesitated, but they saw the badges. They saw the authority. They left. Now it was just them. Daeseong, Maria, and the 3 architects of her nightmare. Mr. Han, Pavel smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. Surely you understand. Business complications. The girl unfortunately learned things that create problems for several important people. She is delirious. She might say things that are untrue. She needs to be sedated, Catherine said, reaching for a syringe on the counter. For her own good. They were not here to help. They were here to silence her. A medical complication, an overdose, a tragic death of a stressed secretary. Daeseong looked at the 3 of them. Then he looked at Maria, who was terrified, pressing herself against the pillows. You know, Daeseong said. His voice dropped an octave. I have spent 15 years building the reputation of a monster. I made people believe I was the heir to the Baekho syndicate. I did terrible things to maintain that cover. He reached into his jacket pocket. Pavel flinched, reaching for his hip. But Daeseong did not pull a gun. He pulled a leather wallet. He flipped it open. A gold badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. National Intelligence Service, Special Operations Division. Badge number 2847, Daesong announced. And you three are under investigation for 47 counts of human trafficking conspiracy. The silence in the room was absolute. Pavel stared at the badge. You are a cop? Intelligence, Daesong corrected. And I am the one who is going to bury you. Pavel's face twisted into a snarl. Kill him! James Adeyemi lunged. The room exploded into motion. James was big, but Daeseong was precision-engineered. Daeseong sidestepped the Nigerian commissioner's haymaker, grabbed his wrist, and used the man's own momentum to slam him face-first into the metal supply cabinet. James hit the floor groaning. Pavel pulled a suppressed pistol from his jacket. No! Maria screamed. Daeseong did not retreat. He grabbed a metal tray from the counter and flung it like a frisbee. It struck Pavel in the hand just as the gun fired. The bullet shattered the mirror above the sink. Daeseong closed the distance. It was a blur of violence. He drove his knee into Pavel's gut, then delivered a palm strike to the chin that knocked the Russian backward over a medical trolley. Catherine Moreau backed into the corner, dropping the syringe. Her hands were up. I did not. Daesong stood over Pavel, breathing hard but calm. He kicked the gun under the bed. That, Daesong said, straightening his tie, is assault on a federal agent. Add it to the list. Maria stared at him wide-eyed. Maria, Daesong said, not looking back. The evidence. Do you have it on you? Yes, she said. Her voice was shaking. She reached for her necklace. This pendant. It has been recording every conversation for 3 years. Every meeting, every private discussion. Over 8,000 hours of audio. She fumbled with the clasp, pulling the small silver drive free. She pressed a button on the side. Director Chen Wei's voice filled the room. It was tinny but unmistakable. The shipment from Moldova needs to arrive by the 14th. Ensure the girls are sedated crossing the border. Use the diplomatic lane. Catherine Moreau slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands. Pavel, groaning on the floor, looked up with hatred. You have been recording everything? Pavel spat blood. Every single word, Maria said. Suddenly, the door handle turned again. A key slid into the lock. The door opened. Director Chen Wei stood there. He was flanked by 2 armed security guards, his personal mercenaries. He looked at the unconscious James Adeyemi. He looked at Pavel on the floor. He looked at Daeseong. And then he smiled. It was a terrifying grandfatherly smile. Maria saw the flash of gold at his wrists. His cufflinks. They were onyx set in gold. The same ones she had stared at for 3 days while the smell of burning skin filled her nose. Maria, Chen Wei said softly, you have done excellent work. Truly. But this ends now. He stepped into the room. Mr. Han, Chen Wei continued, his voice smooth. Despite your credentials and this impressive display of martial arts, this does not concern Korea. This is an internal matter. Walk away, and I will forget you were ever here. Daeseong looked at Maria. She was broken and bleeding, but she was holding the evidence that could topple governments. He looked at Chen Wei, the respected director who organized anti-trafficking summits while orchestrating the trafficking networks. He looked at the 2 mercenaries behind Chen, their hands hovering near their holsters. Daeseong made a decision. It was a decision that would end his 15-year deep cover operation. It was a decision that would destroy his carefully constructed criminal identity and expose him to every enemy he had ever made in the underworld. He pulled out his phone. He did not call for backup. He did not call the police. He dialed a specific number. "Central Command," he said into the phone. His eyes were locked on Chen Wei. "This is Agent Han. Activate Article 13. Lock down the summit. No one leaves. Seal the perimeter." Chen Wei's smile faltered. "You cannot." "I just did," Dasyong said. He hung up and smiled. A cold, dangerous smile that made the Mafia boss persona look like a puppy. "You are right, Chen," Dasyong said. "This does not concern Korea. This concerns the 200 delegates out there, the 34 countries watching live, and the thousands of victims waiting for justice. So let us give it to them." He stepped toward the door. "We are not doing this in a back room," Dasyong declared. "We are doing this on stage, publicly. What happens when an undercover operative chooses truth over cover? When exposure becomes the weapon. Stay with us because this collapse just triggered a battle that will expose corruption at the highest levels, and this battle is about to go global." The double doors to the main summit hall did not open with a polite creak. They burst outward, kicked open with a force that shattered the murmuring tension of the room. Dae-sung Han strode through the debris of the entrance. He wasn't walking with the swagger of a gangster anymore. He was moving with the urgent, terrifying purpose of a man carrying a bomb that was about to detonate. But he wasn't carrying explosives. He was pushing a gurney. The wheels of the medical stretcher squeaked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, a sharp, discordant sound that cut through the low hum of the gathered delegates. On the mattress, strapped in and pale as a sheet, lay Maria Jonathan. Her blazer was ruined, stiff with dried blood. Her breathing was audible, a ragged wheeze amplified by the sudden, stunned silence of the room. Confusion rippled through the audience like a wave. A murmur started in the back and surged forward. "Why isn't she going to a hospital? Is that the Korean delegate? Where are the paramedics?" The cameras, which had been idly panning the crowd during the delay, instantly snapped into focus. Red tally lights blinked on. Live feeds were beaming this bizarre procession to 34 countries. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. They were all watching a man rumored to be a mafia boss wheel a dying secretary to the center stage of the world's most prestigious diplomatic event. Dae-seong didn't stop at the edge of the stage. He didn't ask for permission. He lifted the front of the stretcher, then the back, hauling Maria up the stairs with a grunt of exertion. He parked her right next to the crystal podium, angled so the cameras could see the devastation on her face. Then, he stepped to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, the ministers, the ambassadors, the commissioners. For 15 years he had slouched, smirked, and played the part of the indifferent criminal heir. He had let them whisper about his tattoos and his brutality. Now he stood straight. He adjusted his jacket, covering the bloodstain on his cuff. The transformation was physical. The thug vanished. The operative emerged. "My name is Dae-seong Han," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of any accent or affectation. "I am a senior field agent for the National Intelligence Service, Special Operations Division. For 15 years, I have operated under deep cover investigating the connection between organized international crime and diplomatic corruption." The shockwave was palpable. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of it. It was 200 people inhaling simultaneously. The whispers died instantly. "The Mafia boss is a cop?" Dae-seong didn't give them time to process the deception. He leaned closer to the mic, his eyes scanning the room, locking onto the security details stationed at the exits. "Under Interpol Article 13, imminent threat to international security, I am activating emergency investigative protocols. This venue is now under lockdown." He held up his phone, displaying a digital authorization code that flashed on the massive screens behind him. "No communications are to leave this room. No departures are permitted. The exits are sealed. No one leaves until we address a conspiracy that has operated within this summit's leadership for 12 years. A smattering of nervous laughter broke out near the front. A British delegate stood up, indignant. "This is preposterous. You can't hold diplomats hostage." "I am not holding you hostage," Daeshong replied, his voice cutting like a razor. "I am holding you as witnesses." He gestured to the side of the stage where director Chen Wei, Pavel Sokolov, and the others were being corralled by confused security guards who didn't know whether to arrest them or salute them. 7 individuals in this room, Daeshong declared, pointing a finger that felt like a weapon, have conspired to orchestrate the trafficking networks this summit claims to fight. He began the roll call. It was a litany of betrayal. Director Chen Wei, Deputy Minister Pavel Sokolov, Liaison Catherine Moreau, Commissioner James Adeyemi. He named 3 others, a Belgian logistics coordinator, a Thai border control chief, and a Brazilian port authority director. The reaction was instantaneous. Outrage. "Lies!" shouted a delegate from the French section. "Director Chen has dedicated his life to this cause. He is a Nobel nominee." "This is a political stunt," yelled another. "Security! Remove this man!" The hall was teetering on the edge of a riot. Security teams were looking at each other, hands hovering over weapons, unsure of the chain of command. Chen Wei, standing near the wings, straightened his tie. He looked calm. He looked like a martyr being persecuted by a madman. Then a sound cut through the shouting. It was a wet, rattling cough, amplified by the microphone Daeshong had lowered toward the stretcher. Maria propped herself up. It was a visible struggle. Her face was gray, the bruises standing out in stark relief under the stage lights. She grabbed the mic stand with a trembling hand to steady herself. "He dedicated his life," Maria rasped, her voice weak but vibrating with anger, "to protecting traffickers from the very enforcement he pretends to support." She looked at Chen Wei. "I've served as his executive secretary for 3 years. I managed his calendar. I booked his flights. And I documented everything." The room went quiet again. The sight of her, broken, bandaged, yet defiant, was hypnotic. Maria reached inside her collar and pulled out the silver pendant. She held it up to the light. It swung gently, a pendulum of judgment. "This is not jewelry," she said. "It is a high-fidelity continuous audio recorder. It has a battery life of 40 days and 128 terabytes of encrypted storage. It has been running for 3 years. "She is lying!" Pavel Sokolov shouted from the wings, his face flushed red. "She is a disturbed woman, a mental patient." Chen Wei stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He walked onto the stage, acting the part of the benevolent leader dealing with a crisis. "This is clearly a tragedy," Chen Wei said, his voice smooth, projected to the cameras. "Maria has been under immense stress. She is making desperate accusations. Mr. Han, or whoever you claim to be, you have no authority here. This is an international summit. You cannot simply lock down a sovereign assembly based on the ravings of an injured employee." He turned to the security chief. "Open the doors. Let these people go." The security chief hesitated. Daeshong stepped between Chen Wei and the podium. "Article 13 gives me exactly that authority when Interpol leadership concurs." Daeshong looked out into the audience, to the 3rd row. "Director Yoshida, you have been copied on my evidence file for the past 6 hours. The file included the biometric decryption keys for the preliminary data. Do you concur?" Slowly, terrifyingly, Kenji Yoshida stood up. The director of Interpol was a man of few words, known for his integrity. He looked at Chen Wei with an expression of profound disappointment. "I have reviewed the files," Yoshida said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I concur. The lockdown stands." The color drained from Chen Wei's face. For the first time, the mask slipped. Daeseong turned back to the giant screen behind the podium. Let's look at the truth. He tapped a command on his phone. The logo of the summit, a dove breaking chains, vanished. In its place, a chaotic web of documents, maps, and bank statements appeared. The evidence cascade, Daeseong announced. Exhibit A, shipping manifests. The screen zoomed in on a series of documents stamped with the Russian Federation's seal. These are humanitarian aid containers authorized by Deputy Minister Pavel Sokolov. They are listed as carrying grain and medical supplies to conflict zones. But here, Daeseong swiped, overlaying thermal imaging scans taken at a border checkpoint. Someone said the Are the heat signatures inside those containers? That is not grain. Those are people. 64 people per container. Sent not to aid zones, but to private mining camps in the Urals. Pavel shouted something in Russian, his fists clenched, but Daeseong was already moving on. Exhibit B, financial flows. A complex diagram of wire transfers appeared. Shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Global Hope Initiative. Children's Future Fund. Sounds noble, but follow the money. Red lines trace the path of millions of dollars. Funds deposited by known trafficking syndicates in Macau. Funds withdrawn, same day, by accounts linked to Director Chen Wei's personal estate trust. The delegates were gasping. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming. It was undeniable. Timestamps, coordinates, verifiable SWIFT codes. Exhibit C, intercepted communications. A log of phone calls appeared. Catherine Moreau, French liaison. You are the reason 19 raids in Marseille failed last year. Catherine, standing near the side of the stage, shook her head frantically. No, that's not. April 17th, 2025. Maria read from the screen, her voice gaining strength. You called a trafficker named Maxim Volkov from a burner phone. The number is displayed behind me. You warned him about a raid scheduled for May 2nd. The raid found empty warehouses. 23 victims vanished that night. Would you like to hear the call? Catherine's face went white. I can explain. This is fabricated, Pavel Sokolov roared. He broke away from the security guards, storming toward the stage. The NIS has motivation to destabilize Russian operations. This is a political hit job. Maria didn't flinch. She looked at Daeseong. Play it. The Brussels tape. Daeseong tapped the screen. The audio system crackled, then hissed. The Polish pipeline needs better documentation to pass German borders. The voice was crystal clear. It was Pavel Sokolov. The acoustics of the room were unmistakably a hotel conference room. I can get the papers, Chen Wei's voice replied on the recording. But the price goes up. 5,000 per head. Fine, Pavel's voice. Just make sure they don't speak. If they speak, we have to dispose of the product. Dispose of the product. The words hung in the air of the summit hall like toxic smoke. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. James Adeyemi, the Nigerian commissioner, realized the ship was sinking. He turned and bolted for the side exit. Secure him! Daeseong barked. 2 security guards tackled Adeyemi before he reached the door. He went down, kicking and screaming, his dignity evaporating in seconds. The other delegates watched in horror. Some were weeping. Others were filming with their phones, live streaming the collapse of the institution they believed in. On the stage, Catherine Moreau broke. She fell to her knees, her elegant suit crumpling against the floor. I didn't know what else to do. She sobbed into the silence. They threatened my family. They sent photos of my daughter walking to school. They said they would take her. I took the money, yes, but I was trying to protect her. It was the death knell. Catherine, Chen Wei hissed, his voice sharp. You don't have to say anything. But the damage was done. One confession validated all the evidence. If she was guilty, the recordings were real. If the recordings were real, they were all monsters. Chen Wei stood slowly. The grandfatherly facade was gone. The humanitarian mask had dissolved, leaving behind the cold reptilian calculator that ran a global empire of misery. He looked at the weeping Catherine with disgust, then turned his gaze to Maria. He looked at her with something between admiration and pure, unadulterated hatred. You don't understand what you've done, Chen Wei said quietly. His voice wasn't amplified, but in the dead silence, everyone heard it. You think this ends with 7 arrests? You think cutting off one head kills the Hydra? He took a step toward the stretcher. Daishang tensed, stepping in front of Maria, but Chen Wei stopped. You've scratched the surface of an operation spanning 19 countries, Chen Wei said, smiling coldly, involving 31 officials, moving $2 billion annually. We are the infrastructure, Maria. You can't arrest us all. You can't protect all the witnesses. He leaned in, his eyes dead and hollow. And Maria, you can't enter your dead man's switch code if you're dead. Movement in the periphery. Daeseong saw it a fraction of a second too late. Pavel Sokolov, utilizing the distraction of Catherine's breakdown, had wrestled a sidearm from a stunned security guard. He wasn't aiming at Daeseong. He wasn't aiming at the exit. He raised the gun and pointed it directly at Maria's head. Drop it! Daeseong screamed, reaching for his own weapon. But Pavel was already squeezing the trigger. Time seemed to warp. Daishang had exactly 1 second. He could lunge for Pavel to secure the arrest and the chain of evidence, or he could throw his body in front of the bullet to save the witness. He couldn't do both. The barrel flashed. The barrel flashed. The sound of the gunshot was not a bang. It was a thundercrack that detonated in the enclosed acoustic space of the summit hall. But Dae-Sung Han did not try to catch the bullet. He moved the gun. In the fraction of a second it took for Pavel Sokolov's finger to depress the trigger, Dae-Seong stepped inside the Russian's guard. His left hand chopped upward, striking Pavel's wrist with the force of a sledgehammer. The impact didn't just redirect the weapon. It shattered the radio ulnar joint. Crack. The gun discharged, but the bullet bit harmlessly into the plaster of the ceiling, raining white dust down onto the stage. Daeseong didn't stop. The interception was move 1. Move 2 was a savage pivot. Daeseong grabbed the barrel of the pistol, ignoring the searing heat of the metal, and twisted it inward against the natural rotation of Pavel's thumb. Pavel screamed, a high-pitched sound that the microphone caught and amplified to the entire world. The gun flew from his grip, skittering across the polished marble floor until it spun to a stop at the feet of a terrified Swiss diplomat. Move 3 was the finish. Daeseong swept Pavel's legs while driving a palm strike into the man's solar plexus. The massive Russian deputy minister left his feet, horizontal in the air for a heartbeat, before Daeseong slammed him into the floor. The impact shook the stage. Daeseong dropped his knee onto Pavel's throat, pinning him instantly. For 1 second, there was silence. Then, the hall erupted. It was absolute bedlam. 200 delegates were screaming, scrambling over chairs, or diving beneath tables. Security teams were shouting conflicting orders, their earpieces buzzing with panic. And through it all, the camera shutters clicked like a swarm of mechanical locusts. The red tally lights of the broadcast cameras never blinked off. The world was watching a diplomat try to execute a witness, and they were watching a mafia boss take him down with the efficiency of a war machine. "My phone!" The cry came from the stretcher. Maria was struggling against the straps, her face pale, her eyes wild with a fear that had nothing to do with the gunshot. Daeseong! The code! Now! Daeseong didn't look up from Pavel, whose face was turning purple under the pressure of his knee. He reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand, pulled out Maria's cracked smartphone, and slid it across the floorboards. It stopped inches from her hand. Maria grabbed it. Her fingers were shaking so violently she could barely tap the screen. She gasped for air, fighting the darkness encroaching on her vision. 11 minutes remaining. She tapped in the alphanumeric sequence. Alpha, 7, Tango, 4, processing. The loading bar crawled across the screen. Verify, she screamed at the device. Identity confirmed. Dead man's switch reset. Timer paused. Maria slumped back against the pillow, the phone clutching to her chest like a lifeline. Evidence secure, she whispered. Then she looked up. She looked past the chaos, past the security guards rushing the stage, and looked directly into the lens of the primary BBC camera. To the 11 journalists I sent the encrypted files to, she said, her voice shaking but audible over the din. Publish on my signal. Not yet, but have your fingers on the keys. The statement hit director Chen Wei like a physical blow. He stood frozen near the podium, watching the scene unravel. He had calculated every variable: the security, the bribes, the media narrative. But he hadn't calculated this. She's backed up everything, Chen Wei whispered to himself, the realization dawning with horror. We can't silence her. Killing her just releases the data. On the floor, Pavel Sokolov realized it too. The pressure on his throat eased slightly as security guards finally reached the stage, taking over custody from Daeseong. As they hauled the Russian minister to his feet, the pain in his broken wrist and the terror of the situation broke him completely. Chen! Pavel screamed, his eyes bulging. They have everything! The audio, the records, the Brussels tape. Shut up, Pavel, Chen Wei snapped, his composure cracking. Say nothing. But loyalty is a currency that devalues quickly when facing life imprisonment. Pavel struggled against the guards, spitting blood. I am not going down alone, Pavel roared. Chen Wei organized everything. The summit was his cover. He recruited all of us. He promised diplomatic immunity. He promised the routes were secure. The confession was broadcast live to 34 nations. It was the first domino. James Adeyemi, who had been tackled near the exit, heard Pavel's outburst. He saw the ship sinking and decided to grab a life raft. I want a deal, James shouted from the floor, his face pressed against the carpet. I will testify. I have names. I have dates. I know where the safe houses are in Lagos. I can give you the entire West African network. Catherine Moreau, still weeping on the stage, looked up. She saw her colleagues turning on each other. She thought of her daughter. She thought of the prison sentence waiting for her. 2.3 million euros, she sobbed, her voice rising into a hysterical keen. Over 4 years. I can show you the accounts. I can prove Chen controlled the distribution. He took 40%. He forced us to sign the transfer orders. The confessions cascaded like a landslide. The carefully constructed wall of silence, built over 12 years of fear and greed, disintegrated in under 60 seconds. Each official tried to save themselves by burying the others. Daesong stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He walked over to Maria's stretcher. They didn't speak. They just watched the conspiracy destroy itself. It was ugly. It was loud. And it was the most beautiful thing Maria had ever seen. But director Chen Wei did not scream. He did not beg. He watched his subordinates crumble with a look of profound disdain. He smoothed his silver hair. He buttoned his suit jacket. And then he started to laugh. It was a low, dry chuckle that grew into a genuine laugh. It was so out of place, so chillingly arrogant, that the room slowly fell silent again. You think you've won? Chen Wei asked. He looked at Daesiong, then at Maria. You think because these cowards are crying, you've won? He walked back to the podium. The security guards hesitated, unsure if they should tackle a man who carried himself with such absolute authority. Chen Wei leaned into the microphone. This summit? He gestured to the flags, the banners, the slogans. Theater. I have run anti-trafficking operations for 12 years. And do you know why they were successful? Because I decided which criminals we caught. Every raid I organized, I warned the traffickers first. Every safe house we established, I leaked the locations to the cartels. Every witness protection program? He smiled, compromised. The horror in the room was suffocating. You want to know how deep this goes? Chen Wei pulled a slim tablet from his inside pocket. He tapped the screen, casting a new image onto the massive display behind him. It was a network chart, but it wasn't just the 7 people in the room. 31 officials, Chen Wei declared, across 19 countries. The chart was a spiderweb of corruption. It showed connections to government ministers in Europe, police chiefs in Southeast Asia, border control directors in the Americas, and even 2 senior coordinators within Interpol itself. We have been operating for over a decade, Chen Wei said, his voice booming with pride. We move $2 billion annually. We control the ports. We control the borders. We control the police. He turned to look at Maria on the stretcher. And you poor broken secretary, you think exposing 7 people matters? We are the system, Maria. You can't dismantle the infrastructure of the world. Maria closed her eyes for a second. The pain in her ribs was a fire, but the fire in her blood was hotter. She grabbed the rail of the stretcher. She pulled. Her muscles screamed, her vision swam, but she forced herself up. She didn't just prop herself up this time. She sat fully upright, swinging her legs over the side of the gurney. Daesiong moved to support her, but she held up a hand. She needed to do this alone. You're right, Director, Maria said. Her voice was not raspy anymore. It was cold steel. 7 people don't matter. She looked at the cameras. She looked at the world watching her. But 8,247 recorded conversations matter, she said. Bank transfers totaling $1.8 billion matter. Shell company registries in 23 countries matter. She reached for the pendant around her neck again. And the testimony of 200 survivors I have interviewed over 3 years, whose statements are notarized, documented, and backed up in 4 secure cloud locations, they matter. She nodded to Daesiong. Show them the real evidence. Daesiong tapped his phone. The screen behind them flickered. Chen Wei's chart vanished. In its place, a new image appeared. It was the same network Chen Wei had bragged about. But this version was different. This version was dissected. The NIS investigation, Daesiong announced. The global organization chart filled the screen. Every face Chen Wei had alluded to was now visible. Names, photos, dates of birth. 31 officials identified, Daesiong read from the screen. Trafficking routes mapped across 5 continents. Financial flows documented through 47 shell companies. The screen zoomed in on the faces. Minister of Transport, Belgium. Chief of Port Authority, Brazil. Deputy Director of Immigration, Thailand. This is 3 years of my life, Maria said. Every conversation I translated, I recorded. Every file I processed, I copied. Every survivor who trusted me, I documented. You built an empire on suffering, Chen. I built a case that will dismantle it brick by brick. The summit hall was silent. This was no longer a scandal about 7 corrupt officials. This was the unveiling of a global cancer. Chen Wei stared at the screen. For the first time, his arrogance cracked. His hands trembled. You'll never convict us all, Chen Wei stammered, backing away. We have immunity. We have resources. The courts will take years. We had. The voice came from the third row. Director Kenji Yoshida of Interpol was standing again. He was holding a phone to his ear, listening intently. He lowered the phone and looked at Chen Wei. You had immunity, Yoshida said. As of this moment, Interpol is issuing red notices for all 31 individuals identified in the file. Immunity is being challenged in 19 countries simultaneously. Yoshida pointed to the camera crews. And every word of this summit is being broadcast live to 34 nations. The world is watching you confess, Chen. There is no court that will save you now. The doors to the summit hall burst open again. This time, it wasn't a lone operative. Dozens of Swiss federal police officers in tactical gear swarmed the room. Everyone down! Police! The frenzy that followed was a blur of motion. The 7 summit officials were dragged from the stage. Catherine Moreau was weeping as cuffs were slapped on her wrists. James Adeyemi was hauled up from the floor. Pavel Sokolov, groaning in pain, was lifted onto a separate stretcher, his hands cuffed to the rails. Other delegates, the innocent ones, watched in shock, hugging each other, crying, or staring blankly at the screen that still displayed the faces of the betrayed network. Outside the venue, the wail of sirens grew deafening. The media frenzy was just beginning. On the stage, the adrenaline finally left Maria's body. The pain rushed back in like a tidal wave. She slumped forward. "Dae-seong," she whispered. "I need to—" He was there immediately. He caught her before she could fall, his arm supporting her weight with a gentleness that belied the violence he had just unleashed. "Hospital," he said firmly. "Now, you've done enough." Maria looked up at him. A weak, exhausted smile touched her lips. Did we actually? You exposed a conspiracy that will take years to fully prosecute, Dae-seong said, looking into her eyes. You gave a voice to thousands of victims, and you survived. He looked at her seriously, his dark eyes intense. That last part might be the most important. Paramedics rushed the stage, taking over from Dae-seong. They quickly checked her vitals, laid her back on the stretcher, and began wheeling her toward the exit ramp. As they reached the edge of the stage, the procession stopped. Director Chen Wei was being escorted out by 2 large officers. He was in handcuffs. His suit was rumpled, his hair messy. But as he saw Maria, he stopped. He refused to move. The officers tugged at him, but he planted his feet. You won the battle, Maria, Chen Wei said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the charm, stripped of the arrogance. It was just hateful. But the war? The network doesn't end with 31 arrests. There are people you didn't identify, systems you didn't expose, and they know your name now. He leaned in, ignoring the police officer trying to push him forward. You'll never be safe again, he whispered. Was it worth it? The paramedics paused, looking down at the woman on the stretcher. Maria Jonathan looked at him. She looked at the man who had ordered her torture. She looked at the man who had sold human beings like cargo. Her eyes had seen too much suffering, endured too much pain, and she had chosen justice anyway. Ask me that question when you're in prison, Maria said softly. And when I'm visiting the survivors you tried to sell, then I'll tell you what's worth it. She signaled the paramedics. Go. What happens after the battle, when the cameras stop rolling and reality sets in? Stay with us for the ending that will challenge everything you believe about justice, sacrifice, and the price of truth. The silence of the hospital room was a jarring contrast to the roar of the summit hall. There were no cameras here, no screaming delegates, just the rhythmic beep hiss of a ventilator in the hallway and the hum of the air conditioning. Maria Jonathan opened her eyes. The ceiling was white, sterile, safe. She turned her head, the movement sending a dull ache through her chest. But it was nothing compared to the agony of 3 days ago. Sitting in the chair by the window was Dae-seong Han. He wasn't wearing the expensive Italian suit of a mafia heir. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. For the first time, Maria saw him clearly. The tattoos on his arms, intricate dragons and tigers interwoven with scars, were fully visible. He looked tired. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes after a decade of adrenaline finally leaves the bloodstream. "You're awake," he said softly. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "You've been out for 3 days. Surgery on your ribs to plate the fractures. Treatment for internal bleeding. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery." Maria blinked, her throat dry. She didn't ask about her health. She didn't ask about the pain. "The arrests?" she rasped. Dae-seong sat forward, elbows on his knees. 31 officials detained, across 19 countries. Chen-wei, Pavel, Catherine, James, they are all in custody. Switzerland froze 47 shell company accounts within an hour of your testimony. Interpol has launched investigations in every connected country. He reached for a tablet on the bedside table and handed it to her. The screen was filled with headlines in dozens of languages: French, English, Korean, Arabic. Her name was everywhere. The secretary who toppled an empire, modern slavery's whistleblower. 200 victims saved by one woman's evidence. Maria looked at the photos of herself, the bruised woman on the stretcher, defying the powerful men in suits. She scrolled past the praise. She scrolled past the hero worship. "How many weren't saved?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Dae-seong didn't look away. He didn't offer false comfort. "Thousands," he answered honestly. "The network was larger than we thought. We identified the trafficking routes, but the victims were moved before we could execute the raids. Some organizations went dark the moment the broadcast started. Others activated contingency plans we didn't know existed." Maria closed her eyes, the tablet resting heavily on her chest. "So people are still suffering. Because we couldn't move fast enough. People are suffering because evil exists, Maria," Dae-seong said firmly. "But you gave law enforcement the tools to fight it. That matters." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the pristine streets of Geneva. "The NIS wants to debrief me. It will take 6 months of paperwork, testimony, and interviews. They'll probably retire me afterward. My cover is blown. I can't go back undercover. My face is on every news channel in the world." He paused, watching a bird fly past the window. "But I have 15 years of intelligence in my head. I know trafficking routes they don't. I know players who weren't in your recordings. I could walk away, take a desk job, teach at the academy, live a quiet life." Maria watched him. She saw the tension in his shoulders. "But you won't." "No." Dae-seong turned back to her. "I'm thinking of going independent, using what I know to continue the work outside official channels. No bureaucracy, no jurisdictional limitations, no diplomatic immunity to hide behind." He walked back to the bed and looked at her seriously. "I'm asking if you want to join me. Not as my partner, not romantically. As my colleague. Your documentation skills, your languages, your ability to gather evidence. We could do more good together than either agency would let us do officially." Maria looked at him. It was a tempting offer. To keep fighting. To use the fire that had kept her alive for 3 years. The safe choice was to testify, accept witness protection, change her name, and disappear into a quiet life in a small town. The dangerous choice was to step back into the shadows with the man who had saved her. What happened to the survivors we identified? Maria asked. The 200+ victims in my testimonies? Rescue operations are ongoing, Daeseong reported. 147 recovered so far. 53 are still missing. And the others? The thousands in the system we haven't identified? Still trapped. Still waiting for someone to find them. Maria looked at her hands. The bandages were clean white. I can't, she said softly. Daeseong, I can't join you. Daeseong nodded slowly. There was no judgment in his eyes, just understanding. I get it. You've given enough. You deserve peace. No, Maria said, pushing herself up straighter despite the flare of pain in her ribs. You misunderstand. I can't join you because I'm not built for field operations. I am not an operative. I am a translator who learned to gather evidence because someone had to. She took a deep breath. For 3 years, I gathered evidence alone. I was terrified every single day. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if my documentation would ever matter. I did it in isolation because that's what the situation demanded. She looked at Daeseong, her eyes burning with a new kind of intensity. But that is not how this should work. Real change doesn't come from lone wolves and undercover operatives kicking down doors. It comes from systems, institutions, people working together transparently. I'm testifying, she declared, publicly, at every trial. I'm putting my face and my name to this evidence because victims need to see that speaking up leads to justice. I'm working with Interpol to create a new reporting system, one that can't be compromised by individual corruption because it's distributed, verified, and transparent. Daeseong looked surprised. You're staying in the system? I'm fixing the system, Maria corrected. The reason Chen Wei could operate for 12 years is because anti-trafficking work depended on individuals being heroic. One corrupt director could compromise everything. But if we build a system where evidence is automatically distributed, where reports go to multiple agencies simultaneously, where corruption in one country can't hide evidence from others. She reached for a folder on the nightstand, papers she had been marking up even from her hospital bed. She showed him the diagrams. Decentralized reporting, blockchain verification for evidence chains, international witness protection that doesn't depend on local officials, transparent fund tracking so money can't disappear into shell companies. Daeseong scanned the documents. He saw the logic immediately. You're building an anti-corruption infrastructure. I'm making sure the next person who sees what I saw doesn't have to hide for 3 years gathering evidence alone, Maria said. They can report it immediately, safely, with protection. She looked him in the eye. You want to save individuals, Daeseong. That's noble. And it's necessary. But I want to change the system so individuals don't need saving. Both approaches matter. We just each have to do what we're built for. Daeseong smiled. It was a genuine smile of respect. You're right. Field operations save dozens. System reform saves thousands. And your fieldwork gives me cases to use as evidence for why the system needs changing, Maria added. We're not working together. We're working in parallel. 6 months later. The courtroom in The Hague was packed. The air was thick with tension. But Maria Jonathan sat in the witness stand with the stillness of a statue. She wore a simple suit. Her scars were covered, but she didn't hide her face. Ms. Jonathan, the prosecutor asked, do you recognize the voice on this recording? I do, Maria said into the microphone. Her voice was calm, factual, devastating. It is the voice of director Chen Wei. Chen Wei sat in the defendant's box. He looked smaller now. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by prison gray. He glared at her, but she didn't flinch. For 3 days, Maria testified. She played audio recordings. She presented documents. She explained the complex web of shell companies and trafficking routes. Under cross-examination, the defense attorneys tried to paint her as unstable, as a thief, as a liar. She remained unshakable. She didn't get angry. She just pointed to the data. The verdict came down on a Tuesday. Guilty on all counts. Sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was intense. Microphones were thrust in her face. "Are you afraid of retaliation?" a reporter shouted. Maria stopped. She looked directly into the camera. "I was afraid for 3 years. Fear is what they count on. But I'm not in hiding. My name is public. My testimony is public. Because the only way to defeat corruption is to drag it into the light and refuse to look away." "What's next for you?" another reporter asked. "I'm working with Interpol to implement the Safe Report system," Maria said. "I'm testifying in 6 more countries. I'm training other potential informants on how to gather evidence safely. And I'm telling survivors that speaking up matters, because I proved it does." Thousands of miles away, in a humid cafe in Southeast Asia, Dae-seong Han watched the coverage on his phone. He was dressed in civilian clothes, cargo pants, and a linen shirt. He was sitting across from a local NGO director who looked terrified but hopeful. Dae-seong's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maria. "Chen Wei convicted. 147 survivors recovered. 53 still missing." "Your kind of work or mine?" Dae-seong typed back. "Both. Always both." He turned off his phone, slipped it into his pocket, and looked at the NGO director. "Okay," he said, pulling out a map. "Show me where the trucks are crossing the border." Maria sat alone in her apartment in Geneva. She had refused witness protection. She insisted on a visible life. She looked at the wall above her desk. It was covered in photos. There were 147 faces, the recovered survivors. Beside them, there were 53 empty rectangles, the ones still missing. "People ask me if it was worth it," Maria said to the empty room. Her voice was quiet, reflective. 3 years of fear, torture, nearly dying on a summit floor. My name forever attached to this case. She stood up and touched one photo. A young girl smiling shyly in a recovery center garden. "Her name is Amara," Maria whispered. "She was trafficked at 14, held for 2 years. My evidence led to her rescue. She's 17 now. She's in school. She's learning to trust again. Was it worth it? Ask Amara. Ask the 146 others. Ask the thousands who will be saved by the system we're building." She looked at the 53 empty spaces. "But also ask me about the ones we didn't save. The ones who are still trapped. The ones who died before we exposed the network." She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. A new file was waiting. A new case. Because the truth is, justice isn't clean. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't undo trauma or bring back lost years. She began to type. But justice is still worth fighting for. Not because it's perfect, because it's necessary. And sometimes, she whispered, the price of truth is the only price worth paying. 3 years of hiding, 1 moment of collapse, 1 decision to speak truth instead of seeking safety. And the world shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but it shifted. Because that is what truth does. Not destroy evil in one battle, but shift the ground so evil has fewer places to hide. Maria Jonathan learned what every whistleblower learns. Speaking up doesn't guarantee happy endings. It guarantees that you'll sleep at night knowing you didn't look away. And in a world where corruption depends on good people's silence, refusing to be silent is its own victory. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it has to be. Now, before you go, I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching this story unfold from right now? I always love seeing how far these stories travel, so drop your city or country in the comments below. And if Maria's courage resonated with you today, do me a favor. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, so we can bring you the next chapter together. Thanks for being here.